Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. Today is the next video in my series of March of the Machine Commander deck techs. I'm covering every legendary creature from March of the Machine's main set, plus the extra legends from Mom Jumpstart and the special pre-release promos, and now I'm doing the non-face legends from the Mom Commander product. With this deck, I've almost finished, so check out the playlist in the video's description for all the ones I've done so far. As you see, today our commander is Shalai and Hallar, respectively the Angelic Protector of the Llanowar Forest and the Fire-using Archer of the Llanowar Elves, both from Dominaria, because that's where Llanowar is. Hallar is unique in their use of fire magic and their bond with their Kavu mount, while Shalai is unusual in her deep devotion to the Elves of Llanowar. Some of them mistrust her, but she fought side by side with them during the first Phyrexian invasion of Dominaria. Then, during the events of March of the Machine, this pair teamed up in unexpected ways. Seriously, how high up are they in this flying art? And what is Hallar's plan here for a soft landing? Maybe this is how a Llanowar elf gets the drop on you? Come on. Anyway, I love this commander, and I'm excited to show you what I put together for it. But before we get started, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build my decks around my commander. I want to show off why it's such a cool card and why I put it at the head of my deck. So I take about 30 cards and put them toward doing whatever that card asks of me. This is our game plan. It's what we do at the table and how we try to win. 30 more cards go towards supporting that game plan in the form of card advantage, acceleration, and interaction pieces. I usually run 1 or 2 sweepers, sometimes more if it would play into the game plan, sometimes none at all, and I almost always keep to a floor of 38 lands, so I can make sure I hit my land drops and I can cast my spells and play the game. So let's talk about our team-up commander. Shalai and Hallar is a 3/3 legendary angel elf, an angel and an elf, for 1 and Naya mana, a red, a green, and a white. It has flying and vigilance, and whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature we control, Shalai and Hallar deals that much damage to target opponent. So I'll start by saying, this is a bit of a popular commander, and the reason is because it's strong. Putting counters on all your creatures is already a great strategy, and turning all your permanent pump into burn as well is just added value. You can definitely build this deck to be extremely powerful. Some people even run it in CEDH. But I wanted to keep this at the usual level and budget of the decks that I build for this channel. That said, it's still likely to turn you into the archenemy at the table, at least on a good night, so be prepared. As you may expect, our plan centers on triggering our commander by covering our creatures with counters. We want to show up to the game with a big bag of D6s, ready to represent our board getting swole. But between our commander's burn ability and the fact that going wide and tall makes it easy to alpha strike the table every time we shuffle up, sometimes the games don't last long enough for us to use all of the dice we bring. That won't stop us from trying, though. We're running all the classics. Cards that put counters on creatures each turn, cards that make our other creatures enter with counters on them, cards that give us counters when players cast spells, and of course, cards that pile counters on themselves, either with triggers or just by having X in their casting cost. We're running a few replacement effects to make those piles sky high, and of course, we also have effects that put counters on our entire team, so Shalai and Hallar can give us a bunch of triggers at once. We also have ways to reward ourselves for all these counters, from drawing extra cards or bringing them back from the yard, to giving us access to extra mana or sending some bonus burn at our opponent's creatures. This is like us triple dipping from the stat boosts that counters give us and the subsequent burn from our commander. We also have a few ways to make tokens, just in case a board full of creature cards wasn't enough for us. And of course, we have to protect our counter burn engine, so we have a few sneaky sources of hexproof, indestructible, and the like. On the surface, the deck is not a complicated beast. We play creatures, make them bigger, and trust our commander to trim our opponent's life totals so we have fewer attacks to make with our now huge monsters. But we're afforded fun and subtle sequencing choices in the process. Do we play out a good attacker first and get a bunch of triggers, or do we lead with another source of triggers so that our following creature spell gets more of them? And although we're stacking replacement effects and building a board of busted-looking beaters, it still feels like the fair magic of our youth. Big stats and big swings carrying the day. Sure, they keep getting bigger, but that just adds to the fun. For us. For our opponents, it probably feels a little more cramped and awkward as they suffer through our growing pains. You'll enjoy this deck if you like watching your threats become more threatening with every turn cycle that passes, or if you like the secret minigame of seeing just how big your creatures can grow before, darn it, the game's over because you won. So, as usual, the Moxfield list we're going over today is linked in the video's description. Underneath it, you will see a considering section, full of cards that I thought about putting in this deck and ultimately which didn't make the cut. But if you have a bigger budget or a smaller one, if you have an idea for how you want to focus on a deck like this differently than I did, or if you like what I did and want to do more of it, that considering section is a great place to start when you build your own Shalai and Hallar deck. So we're going to start with the biggest section in our deck, the counter section. These are all cards that put counters on either themselves or on other creatures and care about counters in those ways. We're going to go through all this and then we'll see how our other cards support this and supplement it. So we're going to start with Mikaeus the Lunarch. This is X and a white for a 0/0 legendary human cleric that enters with X 1/1 counters on him. So this is one of the X spells we have in here. It scales great in this deck. Works well early on, works well late. Both are good for us. Just in case you're wondering, cards that enter, creatures that enter with +1/+1 counters on them, do trigger our commander. It's not like those counters went on it when it was in a different zone and then it came in. It enters and those counters are put on it as it enters. So that still counts for our commander triggering. We can tap Mikaeus to put a 1/1 counter on him, or we can tap him and remove a 1/1 counter on him to put a 1/1 counter on each other creature we control. So great early on, great late, totally fine. Requisition Raid is next. This is a spree card. It costs a single white for a sorcery, but we have to choose at least one additional cost. So really it costs at least 1 and a white, but it might cost up to 3 and a white, just depending on how we want to do it. If we choose the first mode, we will destroy an artifact when it resolves. If we choose the second mode, we will destroy an enchantment. And the last mode is put a 1/1 counter on each creature target player controls. Now, generally, this target player is going to be us. But I suppose you could use this politically if you want to. Say an opponent only has one creature, and you're like, look, I could spend an extra mana to have that player ignore me for a turn cycle, and then you just make that deal with them. It's like, hey, do you want me to pump up your creature if you just leave me alone for a turn? They might be like, sure. Generally, it's better for us to do that to ourselves, but who knows? We've got good options either way. Basking Broodscale is next. This is from Modern Horizons 3, and it's 1 and a green for a 2/2 Eldrazi Lizard with Devoid. This is not relevant in our deck, but it may be relevant if other players, I don't know, have something that cares about the color of your creature. We may actually have a land that cares about the color of your creature. We'll have to look at that once we get to our land base. In any case, even though this is casting for green mana, this card has no color. That's true in every zone. It's just not a green creature. It does have Adapt for 1 and a green, Adapt 1 that is, meaning if it doesn't have any counters on it, you can put a counter on it. If it has counters on it, you can still activate this ability, but it won't do anything. It just will try to put counters on itself, see that it already has some, and it won't work. However, you can just give it a counter if it doesn't have any at that point, just for 2 mana, which is all right. But why would you care about putting counters on it? Well, whenever 1 or more counters are put on this creature, we can create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token with sacrifice this token to add a colorless mana. That does not require us to tap that spawn token, so we can do it at instant speed whenever we want to, even when that creature token has summoning sickness. So having tokens to give us little blockers, to give us a little bit of ramp, pretty good either way. It's also nice if we end up putting a whole bunch of counters on our whole team, and then we've got Eldrazi spawn that are reasonable attackers and blockers anyway, and we can still sacrifice them if we need to. Next up is Diadrine, Synthesis Amalgam. Diadrine or Diadrine, not really sure. I built a deck for this. It'll be linked in the video's description as well. When Edge of Eternities came out, I think it's a great deck. It's a lot of fun. It's a cool creature. It's got a good background. But that's not what you're here for. You're here to hear me read the card. This is X, a green and a white, for an 0/1 legendary artifact creature, construct, with trample. An 0/1 with trample. But it comes in with a number of 1/1 counters on it equal to the amount of mana spent to cast it. That's why it has an X here. There's no X in its rules text. But you can cast this for just a green and a white, and you get an 0/1 with trample. If you cast it for any more than that, and you can cast it for as much as you want, it'll get more counters. And what's nice about this is, it won't actually just be an 0/1. Since you need to spend at least 2 mana to cast it, it'll be a 2/3 for 2. That's already pretty good, since that 2 mana for the green and the white is included in this amount. So we can have it come in and be really big, have it come in and just be a 2/3 for 2 with trample. Pretty good either way. And remember, the amount of counters that it's getting on it as it comes in will trigger Shalai and Hallar as Diadrine enters. And whenever we attack, we can remove a +1/+1 counter from each of 2 creatures we control. That does not mean we can remove 2 counters from the same creature. They have to be 1 counter from 2 different creatures. But we're going to be spreading our counters out a lot, so this is pretty nice, easy to do, and we can remove it from Diadrine itself if we want to. And if we do that, we draw a card and we make a 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token. So a nice little bonus friend, drawing a card, and it costs us some counters, but a lot of the damage we're doing comes from just putting the counters on in the first place. It's nice to have those counters when we attack or block, but sometimes it's worth it to throw 2 of them away if we want to get a card and a bonus creature. Pretty sweet. Next is Incubation Druid. 1 and a green for an 0/2 elf druid that we can tap to add 1 mana of any type that a land we control could produce. And if this creature has a +1/+1 counter on it, we can add 3 mana of that type instead. It also can adapt for 3 and double green, adapt 3, meaning it'll get 3 counters on it and become a 3/5. Typically though, we don't have to adapt this in our deck. Usually we have a way to put a single 1/1 counter on this. It'll be a 1/2, or a 1/3 rather, but it'll still tap for 3 mana, because as long as it has any 1/1 counters on it, it taps for 3 instead of 1. Pretty good acceleration for us. Next up, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles just got released a couple of weeks ago, and we have a couple of cards from it in this deck because they've got a big counters theme in that set thanks to mutagens. So Leader's Talent is a class enchantment. The way these work is you cast it for 1 and a white, and it's an enchantment. You get this first ability as soon as it's on the battlefield. Then at sorcery speed, you can level it up to level 2 for 2 and a white, and then you will have both of these abilities. Once it's level 2, you can pay 3 and a white and level it up to level 3, and now it has all 3 of these abilities. So when it first comes in, it's level 1, and it says whenever we attack, we put a 1/1 counter on target attacking creature. That creature has to be one of the creatures we're attacking with, but still okay. Our commander is 3/3 flying vigilance, so pretty good to put on our commander. Level 2 is whenever a creature we control leaves the battlefield, if it had a counter on it, we gain 2 life. This is not ideal for us. We sort of would like to keep our creatures, but it's something nice as a little bonus to us beyond just this 2 mana to get a counter basically every combat that we have. Also, level 3 is really good because it's whenever we cast a spell, any spell. As long as we're casting it, doesn't matter what it is, we put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control. So if we have 5 creatures, including our commander, and we cast some other spell, we suddenly get 5 Shalai and Hallar triggers, each of which will ping an opponent for 1. Very nice. Next is Luminarch Aspirant. Very similar to level 1 of that last card of Leader's Talent. 1 and a white for a 1/1 human cleric that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. That's pretty great. Just a guaranteed counter every turn, and we don't even have to attack the way we would with Leader's Talent. Sounds good to me. Query and Beast Caller kind of works similarly, but can trigger more than once in a turn. This is a 2/2 for 1 and a green. It's a Dryad Warrior that says whenever we cast a creature spell, we can put a +1/+1 counter on the Beast Caller. So every creature spell, and we're running 35 of them, so that's about a third of our deck that the Beast Caller will be able to trigger, and therefore trigger Shalai and Hallar, just getting bigger and bigger. And when this dies, we can distribute the same number of counters among any number of target creatures we control. So we get to take all of the Beast Caller's counters and put them on other creatures of ours. Very nice effect for us, especially if we have something like a Hardened Scales effect in play. And we'll talk more about that once we get to the extra counters section. Next up is Raucous Entertainer. I was surprised that this was such a good include in this deck, but it really works for us. 1 and a green for a 2/2 Plant Bard from Thunder Junction. That if we pay 1 and tap it, we put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control that entered this turn. So even if this is just pay 1 and tap to put a single 1/1 counter on one creature, we get to do that every turn. It's like saying pay an extra mana for the casting cost of each creature if we're only doing a creature each turn, and it comes in with a 1/1 counter which will trigger our commander. But what if we have more than one creature coming in. Maybe we can cast 2 or even 3 creatures in the same turn, and it only costs us 1 more mana and tapping the Entertainer to put a counter on each of them. Really nice. Especially because we have so many ways that once we have counters on our creatures, getting more counters on them ends up being easier. Plus we get a nice Bard. Arwen, Weaver of Hope is next. For 1 and double green, we get a 2/1 legendary elf noble that says each other creature we control enters with a number of additional +1/+1 counters on it equal to Arwen's toughness. Again, this is the same as we were talking about with the X spells. When these creatures enter with these counters on them, those counters are being put on them as they enter, so they do trigger Shalai and Hallar. What's especially nice about Arwen is if we put counters on Arwen, Arwen's toughness goes up, meaning she gets to share those counters with every creature that comes in because they will get more counters since her toughness is higher. A great place for us to put our counters and spread around the love, I guess. Champion of Lamholt is next. This card is really interesting in this deck. I originally took it out, but it just works so well for us in ways that you wouldn't expect. For 1 and double green, we have a 1/1 human warrior that says creatures with power less than this creature's power can't block creatures you control. So if Champion of Lamholt has a power of 4, our opponents that have creatures that are power 3 or less can't block any of our creatures, no matter how big our creatures are. The size of our other creatures doesn't matter to this ability, only the size of the Champion of Lamholt and the potential blockers. So once the champion gets big enough, all of our creatures, including the champion, are unblockable. And whenever another creature we control enters, we put a 1/1 counter on this creature, the same way we would with our Quirion Beastcaller. But the champion just gets bigger and bigger and makes all of our opponent's creatures unable to block. So this is a really interesting choice in this. We might have put something like Abzan Falconer into this deck that gives all of our creatures with 1/1 counters on them flying. And that ends up just not being as good in play as just having bigger creatures or more creatures that let us have more counters. So that's sort of the way I went with it. But Champion of Lamholt making all of our creatures just unconditionally unblockable just becomes so strong on its own, especially since it makes itself bigger as we play more creatures. It's sort of the one exception to the different ways of making 1/1 creatures with 1/1 counters on them evasive. The other ways just weren't working as well for me, but this one works great. Next we have Collective Effort. This is a sorcery for 1 and double white with Escalate, tap an untapped creature we control. So we get to choose 1 or more of these modes, but of course for every mode beyond the first, we have to tap one of our creatures that isn't tapped. That's okay, we've got a lot of creatures in this deck whose job it is to get big and attack or block once they're big, but until they're big, they're just there for their effect, sort of like they were just enchantments that are sort of backup blockers if we need them. Collective Effort lets us use them in a different way. So we can use this as a removal spell to either destroy a creature with power 4 or greater or destroy an enchantment, or we can use it to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature target player controls. So just like Requisition Raid, this can really make our whole team pretty big. Next we have Evolution Witness, also from Modern Horizons 3. 2 and a green for a 2/1 Elf Shaman Mutant with 1 and a green adapt 2. So similar to what we saw with the Brood Scale for 1 and a green, but we can put 2 counters on the Witness, making it a 4/3. Pretty good. Just remember that Adapt does not let you put counters on it, even though you can activate it, if it already has counters on it. And whenever 1 or more 1/1 counters are put on this creature, we return target permanent card from our graveyard to our hand. So every time we put counters on the Witness, we get a free regrowth. This is great. This is our only recursive card in the deck, and it just puts in so much work for us. Next is Fertilid, a classic. 2 and a green for a 0/0 elemental that comes in with 2 1/1 counters on it. So again, that will trigger our commander for 2. And then for 1 and a green, we can remove a counter from it, and target player gets to Rampant Growth. Search their library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. This is a great way for us to repeatedly Rampant Growth. Just have 2 counters on this, and that means we can activate it twice and it'll die, or we keep putting more counters on it, and then using those counters to pay the Rampant Growth cost every time, and keep Rampant Growthing. Pretty sweet for us. Next we have Good Fortune Unicorn. Much like Arwen, this is one of our several cards that ensures our creatures come in with counters on them. For 1, a green and a white, we get a 2/2 unicorn that says whenever another creature we control enters, we put a 1/1 counter on it. Pretty simple. It's not as good as Arwen. A little more restrictive to cost. Only a little, I guess. But we gotta have redundancy, so that's what it's here for. Next we have Managorger Hydra. This is one of the baby cakes for the deck, which we'll talk about why when we get to Forgotten Ancient. 2 and a green for a 1/1 Hydra with trample that says whenever a player casts a spell, put a 1/1 counter on this creature. That's very simple, but it's worth looking at again. Whenever a player, that means any player including our opponents, on their turn, casts a spell, that means any spell at all, creature, non-creature, doesn't matter. Managorger Hydra gets counters anytime anyone, including us, casts spells, just keeps getting bigger, which means every time someone casts a spell, if our commander's out, Managorger Hydra is going to trigger, get a counter on it, which will trigger Shalai and Hallar, which will let us burn an opponent, and that's all before that spell that the player who cast it, it's before that spell resolves. So this can be really strong for us. It often means that, we cast the Hydra, the turn ends, and by the time we get back to our turn, our 1/1 has become like a 7/7. And our commander's done 6 damage to our opponents in the process. Pretty good. Ornery Tumblewag is next, a card that I wish it saw more play. It just does so much work. For 2 and a green, we get a 2/2 Brushwag mount. Look at this big Brushwag. It says at the beginning of combat on your turn, we put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Just, again, it's that Luminarch Aspirant effect. Just a free 1/1 counter at the start of combat. And then, whenever this creature attacks while saddled, we double the number of 1/1 counters on target creature. It can be the Brushwag itself, just like we can put this counter on the Brushwag itself if we want. And it saddles for 2. Saddle, if you're unfamiliar, is something you can only do at a sorcery speed, but otherwise it's similar to Crew. We tap any number of creatures with a total power of 2 or more, and this Tumblewag becomes saddled. That just means until the end of turn, it is saddled. That's just used for this ability. So we're tapping down a creature we might otherwise not be using for anything, like our Basking Broodscale or our Luminarch Aspirant itself, whatever it may be. Tapping down a creature or 2, getting this thing saddled, we attack with it, hopefully when it's big enough to not die, or maybe we attack an opponent that doesn't have any blockers with the Tumblewag and attack a different opponent with a larger creature that has several counters on it, and we get to double the number of counters on whichever of those creatures we want. It can double 0 if we have 0 counters on something, but if that's the case, why would we need to saddle it? So yeah, being able to double counters is pretty sweet, and that counts as putting those extra counters on it, so it will trigger our commander. Next is Rishkar Pima Renegade. 2 and a green for a 2/2 legendary elf druid that when it enters, we put a 1/1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. So it's 2 1/1 counters, but not on one creature. It has to be 2 creatures. But it can include Rishkar themselves. And each creature we control with a counter on it has tap to add a green mana. So this is another great way for us to use the counters on our creatures and use our creatures that have counters on them without having to throw them out into combat by attacking. A nice little way of ramping for us. Next we have Taurian Mauler. Much like Managorger Hydra, this is 3 mana, but it's 2 and a red. For a 2/2 Shapeshifter, instead of Trample, it has Changeling, which means it is every creature type. Pretty good. That'll be relevant for us in our land base. So if we need something that is an elf or an angel, Taurian Mauler is. It's both, even though it's a nice big bull in this art. And whenever an opponent casts a spell, we put a 1/1 counter on this creature. Works exactly the same way as the Managorger Hydra. Starts with higher power and toughness, doesn't have trample, does have changeling. So both are nice in this deck. Great ways for us to keep accumulating more counters. Unbreakable Formation is next. This is 2 and a white for an instant that gives all of our creatures indestructible until end of turn. Great way to protect our creatures. But if we cast it during our main phase, it does not say at sorcery speed. It just says during our main phase. So we can do this in response to something that's happening during our main phase. If we do that, we put a +1/+1 counter on each of our creatures, and they gain indestructible until end of turn. Or gain vigilance, rather. They already had indestructible. So, yeah, vigilance and indestructible, and an extra 1/1 counter on all of our creatures. Very strong. Next is Warden of the Grove from Tarkir Dragonstorm. 2 and a green for a 2/2 Hydra that puts a counter on itself at the beginning of our end step. That seems good. And then whenever another non-token creature we control enters, it endures X, where X is the number of counters on this creature. Endure means when it enters, we get a triggered ability that lets us either put X +1/+1 counters on that creature or make an XX spirit creature token. So we can make tokens with this if we want to. But generally this is in here so that we can spread its counters around. We go to our end step, or we just put counters on this, then we cast other creatures, and those creatures are always going to get counters. They don't come on to the count. They don't. When that creature enters, the counters aren't already there. The Warden will trigger when those creatures enter, and then that ability will resolve, and we put the counters on then. So there is a moment in the middle where someone could remove the Warden, and it will still put counters. It'll still put that same number of counters on the creature, but you know. We could have something happen like this, where we play Arwen, let's say, when the Warden of the Grove has 4 counters on it. Arwen would come in, Warden of the Grove would trigger, and try and put 4 counters on Arwen. Someone could Lightning Bolt Arwen in response, and then that's too bad. But yeah, when that resolves, we could choose to make the Spirit instead, I believe. I think we don't have to choose whether it's counters or the Spirit until this ability resolves, and it will still endure. So we could just get a Spirit to replace Arwen in that case. That's not bad. 4/4 Spirit. So, next is Felidar Retreat. Gotta run this in our deck. It's so much value for its mana value. Or mana cost, I should say. 3 and a white for an enchantment with landfall. Whenever we have a land enter under our control, we either make a 2/2 white cat beast creature token, or we put a 1/1 counter on each of our creatures, and they all gain vigilance until end of turn. I'm sure you can guess, usually we're doing this. So being able to spread out counters on all of our creatures just by playing land, very, very good. A cat beast is fine too. Seems nice. Always looks like this one has like a nice bow. Next is Forgotten Ancient. This is the reason I was calling Managorcher Hydra and Taurian Mauler baby cakes, because the playtest name, or the nickname for Forgotten Ancient when they were developing it, was Mr. Baby Cakes. That's what I always call it. So Mr. Baby Cakes is 3 and a green for an 0/3 elemental that has that same text as the other creatures. Whenever a player casts a spell, we can put a 1/1 counter on this creature. It is a may, but we're going to. Why not? And then at the beginning of our upkeep, we may move any number of 1/1 counters from this creature onto other creatures. Other creatures is a crazy way of putting this, because it means we don't have to put all those counters on one creature. We can spread them out. And it's any number of these 1/1 counters. So we can leave some on Mr. Baby Cakes if we want. Just an excellent way to get these counters spread out onto our board, in addition to the fact that, let's say we cast the Forgotten Ancient, and then we pass the turn, and by the time we get back to us, our opponents have cast 4 spells. That means 4 counters are going to go on Forgotten Ancient, and we're going to trigger our commander each of those times. So that's 4 damage our commander is sending at our opponents, 1 for each counter. Then we get to our turn, and we move all 4 counters. Well, now those counters are being put on other creatures, so it triggers our commander again for each counter. We get to double up on our damage thanks to Forgotten Ancient. So it encourages us to send those counters elsewhere as much as we're able to. Very nice. Next is Hallar and Elena Partners. 2, a red and a green for a 2/3 legendary human ranger with first strike and reach that says at the beginning of combat on our turn, we put X 1/1 counters on another target creature we control, where X is Hallar and Elena's power. That creature gains haste until end of turn. So much like Arwen, this is only going to trigger at the beginning of combat, but it will do it every beginning of combat, where we get to put extra counters on creatures. That's not what's like Arwen. This is like Arwen. Arwen cares about counters equal to her toughness. Hallar and Elena care about counters equal to its power. So we want to put counters on Hallar and Elena, so we can put more and more counters on other creatures every combat of ours. Plus they get haste. It's pretty good. Lenore Autumn Sovereign is next. This is the face commander for the green-white Coven counters deck from Midnight Hunt. Really fun. 2, a green and a white for an 0/4 legendary human noble with Coven. At the beginning of combat on our turn, we put a 1/1 counter on up to 1 target creature we control. We don't have to put any counters on, but we're probably going to want to. However, whether or not we do, then if we control 3 or more creatures with different powers, we draw a card. That's why Lenore has a 0 power, because it makes it much easier for us to have, if we've got 3 creatures, for them to have different powers. That's also a good way for us to trigger it. If we just put counters on whichever creature would cause us to have 3 creatures of different powers. So if we've already got 2 3/3s and we've got Lenore, at the start of combat, we put a counter on one of the 3/3s. Now we have a 0, a 3, and a 4, and we get to draw a card as well. Pretty sweet. Lily Bowen Raging Grandma from the Fallout decks. This is a fun one. 3 and a green for a 0/0 legendary mutant warrior with vigilance that enters with 2 1/1 counters on it. So like I said, triggers our commander for 2. Then at the beginning of our upkeep, we double the number of 1/1 counters on Lily Bowen if its power is 16 or less. So if at the start of our upkeep its power is 17 or more, this won't happen. If that's the case, otherwise, we will remove all but 1 counter from Lily and gain a life for each counter we removed this way. So pretty nice to be able to put more and more counters on Lily and thereby double them every turn, and eventually we get to a point where Lily's got at least 17 power, and we lose all those counters, which is fine, but we gain life in the process. Just a nice way to continually gain more triggers to our commander during our upkeep. Ruinous Intrusion is next. 3 and a green for an instant that says destroy target artifact or enchantment, and put X 1/1 counters on target creature we control, where X is the mana value of the permanent exiled this way. This is a little bit expensive for a naturalize effect, but it can be really nice if someone's got a big, huge artifact in play. Maybe even, something like a Meteor Golem. Meteor Golem is annoying. It's only a 3/3 creature, but it kills something when it comes in. We Ruinous Intrusion it, now it's exiled, so they can't get it back, and we get to put 7 counters on something, since that's what it costs. Pretty sweet. Next we have Original Shalai, Voice of Plenty. I tried to fit Original Hallar, the Fire Fletcher, into this. Didn't fit as well as Shalai does, but yeah, here's Shalai with incredible Victor Adame Minga's art. Love this. I have a friend who built Shalai as a commander deck. Just really lovely. Anyway, 3 and a white for a 3/4 legendary angel with flying that gives us, all of our planeswalkers, and all of our other creatures besides Shalai Voice of Plenty, hexproof. So excellent protection for us. Prevents our opponents from interacting with us unless they want to interact with Shalai first, or in the form of like a board wipe. And we can pay 4 and double green to put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control, which is expensive. But if we have a lot of mana, which sometimes we do in this deck, this is a sweet mana sink that gives us a lot of triggers from our commander. Slippery Bogbonder is next. This is 3 and a green for a 3/3 human druid with flash and hexproof. The Bogbonder is hexproof, and we can cast at flash speed, which is important, because when it enters, we put a hexproof counter on target creature. Doesn't have to be one of our creatures, but it sure ought to be, and it should be our commander. This is here to protect our commander. Then we move any number of counters from among creatures we control onto that creature. So just like I mentioned before when it came to the Forgotten Ancient, if we put a bunch of counters on Mr. Baby Cakes and then move those counters to something else, we're getting triggers when they go on the Forgotten Ancient and when they go to the other things. Same thing is true here. If we've got 4 or 5 counters among our other creatures, we put the hexproof counter on our commander, we move those 4 or 5 counters to our commander, and we get 4 or 5 points of damage that our commander will trigger with. So yeah, the Bogbonder is nice for us. Plus, 3/3 flash with hexproof for 4 is a pretty difficult to interact with creature, and so therefore a great place for us to put additional 1/1 counters. Ascendant Acolyte is next. This card is just cool. I wanted to have this in here because it just seems like a lot of fun and can be very strong if we have a few turns with it. So 4 and a green for a 1/1 human monk, but it enters with a number of 1/1 counters on it equal to the number of 1/1 counters among other creatures we control. So if we've got 7 or 8 counters among our other creatures, this will enter with 7 or 8 counters on it, so it'll be an 8/8 or a 9/9. And then at the beginning of our upkeep, we double the number of 1/1 counters on the Acolyte. So this can just end up, if we're playing this later in the game and we untap with it, this could just kill a person. We might get 10, 12, 15 counters on this, go to our upkeep, put 10, 12, 15 more counters on it, and zot someone for that much, and that may be the end of the game for them. If the Acolyte gets to continue to live with 20, 30, 40 power counters on it, it's just going to get that same number again, or double that number again, and we get to kill someone else. Yeah, this is a nice creature to hit with the Slippery Bogbonder and put the hexproof counter on it as well. Next up is Defiler of Vigor. This card is so good in this deck. 3 and double green for a 6/6 Phyrexian Worm with Trample that has this paragraph here, which basically just says all of your green permanent spells, take a green pip and treat it like it's a Phyrexian green pip. It lets us pay 2 extra life in addition to the cost of a green permanent spell, and then it costs 1 green less. So it's like we paid life instead of the green mana cost. We can only do that for a single green pip. But that's amazing, because it lets us pay 1 less for all of our green spells simply by paying 2 life. Now, later in the game, yes, we may not want to pay that life because it gets us down too low. Early on, spend 10, 14, 20 life to power more things out in the same turn. Because not only does it make our stuff come out cheaper, it also says whenever we cast a green permanent spell, whether or not we use this to discount it, we put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control. Obviously, that will not be the creature that we're casting if we're casting a green creature, because it's a cast trigger, not an enters trigger. But being able to get out more than one thing in the same turn and thereby put 1/1 counters on all of our creatures more than one time, and it puts those counters on the Defiler of Vigor itself too, so worth it. Totally worth being able to lose a little bit of life or pay a whole bunch of life just to get out more and more things. We have ways to get life back. It's fine. Next up, we have Juniper Order Ranger. 3, a green and a white for a 2/4 human knight ranger that says whenever another creature we control enters, we put a 1/1 counter on that creature and a 1/1 counter on this creature. So this is similar to our Good Fortune Unicorn, but it costs 2 more and puts a counter on itself as well. So we're getting 2 triggers for our commander, putting counters on our creatures every time we have a creature come in when the ranger's in play. 1 for the creature that we had come in, and 1 for the ranger itself. Good. Next is Loyal Guardian. 4 and a green for a 4/4 Rhino with Trample. Already totally fine. And then at the beginning of combat on our turn, if we control our commander, we put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control. So we have to have our commander in play, but this is a 4/4 Trampler for 5 that's just going to become a 5/5 if we go to combat right after we cast it, or right after we cast our commander, whichever one comes second. And it's just going to keep getting bigger, as is our whole team. It does not say each other creature we control, so we're getting the counter on it and on our commander too. Thundering Mightmare is so cool. This is not quite the same thing as what I'm about to say, but it kind of turns itself and another creature into Forgotten Ancients, into Managorger Hydras, into Mr. Baby Cakeses. So for 4 and a green, we get a 3/3 Horse Spirit. It's not the guy, it's the horse. With Soul Bond. Soul Bond means we can pair this creature with another unpaired creature when either enters. They remain paired for as long as we control both of them. That means when this enters, if there's a creature in play that we like, we can just pair them both together right then. If not, we could just not pair it with anything, and then we have something else enter later. Every time any of our other creatures enters, we can choose to bond it with that, and now those are stuck together. You can't replace the Soul Bond without one of them flickering, you know? But yeah. Imagine, for just example, that Shalai and Hallar is in play, and then we cast the Thundering Mightmare. It enters, and we pair it with our commander. That's fine. Then, as long as it's paired with another creature, each of those creatures, the Mightmare and our commander, let's say, has, whenever an opponent casts a spell, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So this is not whenever anyone casts a spell, whenever a player casts a spell. It won't trigger on our spells, but it will trigger on every other opponent's spells of any kind, creature, non-creature, whatever. And we get to put 2 counters on our creatures every time anyone else casts a spell, 1 on the Mightmare and 1 on whatever it's paired with. So similar to our Juniper Order Ranger, we're getting 2 triggers on our commander every time any other player casts a spell. Pretty great. Finally, we have Virtue of Loyalty. 3 and double white for an enchantment that lets us put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control at the beginning of our end step, and we untap those creatures. So virtual vigilance in a way. Virtue of Loyalty, strong for what it does, but it also has an adventure tacked onto it, which is Ardenvale Fealty. If you haven't seen adventures before, this is the way this works. When this is in your hand, you can either cast it as the enchantment, which is the text right here that we just went through, Virtue of Loyalty, or you can cast it as this Ardenvale Fealty adventure, which is 1 and a white to make a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. If you cast Ardenvale Fealty, the adventure, you then exile this card, and you can cast Virtue of Loyalty from exile whenever you want to. Obviously at normal timing rules for enchantments. So you either get the adventure and then the enchantment. You can't cast the adventure once Virtue of Loyalty itself is in play, but you can, play this on turn 2 and then the big version on turn 5. Pretty sweet. And that covers all of our counters tagged cards. Oh, hey, did you just like the video? Nice. Thank you. I'm just kidding. You don't have to like the video. I appreciate it if you did, but I'm kind of just glad you're here anyway. Thanks for sticking around and for watching the video. Anyway, there's more where that came from. We're going to talk about the cards that support our game plan now. These categories right here. Starting with our card advantage section, which as usual, I have tagged as draw, just as a shorthand. It doesn't necessarily mean that all these cards do the draw a card action. So it's a little bit low for the number we do. 10 is sort of the minimum I look at, but we just have so much else going on, and several of these are so repeatable, it ends up working out for us. Keen Sense is an aura that enchants a creature for a single green, and it says whenever an enchanted creature deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. So this is just Curiosity in green. That's pretty good. It's pretty good because if we put it on Shalai and Hallar, it does not say whenever an enchanted creature deals combat damage to an opponent. So anytime we put a counter on one of our creatures, we trigger Shalai and Hallar, do damage to an opponent, then Keen Sense will trigger, and we'll draw a card. Shalai and Hallar and Keen Sense makes any of our counter production into card draw as well. And that ends up being so strong that this card just gives us so much. Every game with it is so much more of an advantage than every game without it, that it's hard to believe it's just worth a single green. Dusk Legion Duelist, from March of the Machine is next. This is 1 and a white for a 2/2 vampire soldier with vigilance that says whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on this creature, draw a card, but only once each turn. So pretty nice being able to get a bonus card each turn just by putting a counter on this duelist, and it's got a fine stats for its mana value and a relevant keyword. That can be great for us. Diadrine, we've already seen. Diadrine lets us, whenever we attack, we can remove a counter from each of 2 different creatures in order to make a 2/2 robot and draw a card. Mikey and Leo, Chaos and Order is next. This is a Ninja Turtles card, of course. It's 2 mana, it's a 2/2 for double Selesnya mana, so you can cast this for double green, double white, or one of each. And it's a legendary mutant Ninja Turtle, obviously. It says whenever we put a counter on a creature we control, we draw a card, only once each turn though. So very similar to our Dusk Legion Duelist, but it works with any creature. As long as we put a counter on a creature, we just draw a card. It's only that once during the turn. So both of these cards are very good if we are doing things and putting counters on our creatures at instant speed, which we'll see later. Mind Stone is next. This is 2 generic mana for an artifact that taps for a colorless mana. So this is one of our mana rocks. It's in here because we can cash it in later if we need to. Pay 1, tap, and sack it to draw a card. Usually this is not what we're doing with the Mind Stone. We need to ramp our way into bigger and bigger spells or more and more spells. But it is there if we're desperate for card draw. We've got the option. That's nice. High Score is next, another Ninja Turtles card. It may be our last one. For 2 and a green, we get an enchantment that says, if 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature we control, that many +1 +1/+1 counters are put on it instead. This effect is called Hardened Scales. It just means we look at the number of counters that would be going on our creature, and we put an extra one on there as well. So if we cast Diadrine for just a green and a white, it's going to come in with 2 1/1 counters on it. But if we have High Score in play, it's going to come in with 2 1/1 counters plus an extra one, so a total of 3. If we were to put 4 mana into X, We're casting it for 6 total mana, so it would come in with 6 counters, but high score says it comes in with 1 extra, so 7. This is one of our replacement effects that does the hardened scales thing. Pretty simple, but the reason that's in this section is because at the beginning of our end step, we draw a card if we control a creature with the greatest power among creatures on the battlefield. This may not happen every turn, but it will happen eventually. We're going to be spreading out a lot of counters, and eventually we're going to have probably several creatures that are the biggest on the battlefield. So yeah, high score can give us a good repeatable card draw, albeit at our end step. Inspiring Call is next. 2 and a green for an instant that lets us draw a card for each creature we control with a +1/+1 counter on it. So this pays us off for all those counters. It also gives all those creatures indestructible until end of turn. So sort of a take on the white card that just gives all our creatures indestructible for 2 and a white, rather than putting counters on them as well. It lets us we get to draw cards for them here. So yeah. Lauren of the Third Path is next. This is my favorite Reclamation Sage. 2 and a white for a 2/1 legendary human artificer with vigilance that says when she enters, we destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. So she's a 2/1 vigilance that comes with a disenchant. Free removal. Free in the sense that it's built into her. And when she doesn't have summoning sickness anymore, we can tap her, and we and another opponent each draw a card. So this is a great way to be a little political at the table, to make a friend maybe, and say, hey look, we're not going to bother each other. We're sitting across from each other. No big deal. We're going to deal with the people on either side of each of us, and maybe at the end of the turn, or end of the game, we'll deal with each other. Totally fine to not play it politically and just give a card to the person who needs it the most, or the person who doesn't really need it, so it's not helping that much. In any case, repeatable card draw for us, it seems pretty good. Snake Umbra works very similarly to Keen Sense. This is 2 and a green for an aura that enchants a creature, just like Keen Sense, and says enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has whenever this creature deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. So, similar to Keen Sense, but it also gives +1/+1. Is that worth an extra mana? Maybe not, but Umbra Armor sure is. What that means is, if the enchanted creature would be destroyed, instead we remove all damage from it and destroy this aura. So this sort of puts a little bubble around Shalai and Hallar, because obviously that's who we're going to put this on, to protect them in the process of giving us more and more card draw every time they trigger when we put counters on our other creatures. Or on them. And of course, we've already seen Lenore. She lets us draw a card at the start of combat when we put a 1/1 counter on on up to one of our creatures, assuming we then have 3 or more creatures with different powers. That's our card advantage section. Let's talk about acceleration, which again I've just shorthanded here as ramp. Obviously, we're running Soul Ring. 1 generic mana for an artifact that taps for 2 colorless mana. It's the symbol of the format for a reason. It's extremely powerful. Put it in your deck. Wayfarer's Bauble is also good. Even though we're in a green deck, a little bit of extra rampant growth option is not bad for us. A single generic mana for an artifact that if we pay 2, tap, and sack it, we get to rampant growth. Search our library for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. We are pretty green in this deck. We've got a significant amount of white, and we're almost just sort of splashing red. A little more than a splash, I guess, but Wayfarer's Bauble as a way to give us one more way to rampant growth can really help us, especially early on. If like turn 1 we do this, turn 2 we crack it, so that going into turn 3 we've got 4 mana, and we can cast our commander right away. Arcane Signet is next. Also basically an auto-include in most decks these days, especially ones like this that are 3 colors. 2 generic mana for a rock that taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. So in this deck, white, red, or green. 2 mana untapped rock that taps for any of our 3 colors? Yeah, we're running that. Basking Broodscale, we've already seen. It lets us make that Eldrazi spawn that we can sack for colorless mana whenever we put a counter on the Broodscale. Seems good. Farseek is a version of Rampant Growth. It's 1 and a green for a sorcery that lets us search our library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So obviously we don't have any swamps or islands in this deck, but we do have some plains and mountains. It does not say basic, however. So we have dual-typed lands, and there are other ones you can upgrade this deck with if you want. But what I typically do with Farseek is I go and find my bicycle lands. Lands that are going to come in tapped anyway, but are dual types. So if we find a plains forest, The fact that it has the forest type and taps for green doesn't negate its ability, the fact that it also has the plains type and taps for white. So we can get a dual land with Farseek. Since it's going to be tapped anyway, since it's a bicycle land, we might as well get that. We can get whichever one we maybe need more. Red or white mana. We could also get the one that's white and red. That's a possibility. Radiant Summit, I think it is, maybe? Anyway, we'll see. Felwar Stone is next. This is great for 2 and even sometimes 1 color decks, but I run this in all my decks that are at least 3 colors. It's a 2 mana rock that comes in untapped and taps for 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. So it's true. We might be up against 3 opponents that are playing blue or black or both and nothing else, in which case this is a 2 mana rock that taps for a color of mana that we can use for generic mana costs. That's still pretty great. But if anyone's running green, which, I mean, come on, it's Commander, someone else is probably running green, then this is an untapped rock that taps for 1 of our colors, and that's already all right. If we have green, white, and red among all of our opponents, then this is just another Arcane Signet for us. It's good no matter what. We've seen the Incubation Druid. It lets us, it's just a mana dork, taps for 1 mana of any color that or any type rather, that a land we control could produce, or 3 if it's got counters on it. We've seen the Mind Stone, taps for colorless mana, but we can also trade it in for a card later on. We saw Farseek. Here's actual Rampant Growth. 1 and a green, sorcery, search your library for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped and then shuffle. Nothing wrong with that. You could upgrade this, if you want, into Nature's Lore. Nature's Lore is a couple more dollars, and you can find a forest, and it can come in untapped, which would be great for any of our basic forests, but also for our Tango lands, assuming we already have 2 basics in play. But yeah, I didn't think it was totally necessary to go to Nature's Lore for like $3 more, but you sure could. Fine upgrade with Rampant Growth. Or if you wanted to upgrade the Wayfarer's Bauble to that. We've seen the Fertilid. Fertilid lets us do a repeatable Rampant Growth by eating counters off of it and paying 1 and a green each time. Kami of Whispered Hopes, one of the most expensive cards in our deck, which is great because it's an excellent card. This is 2 and a green for a spirit that taps for X mana of any 1 color, where X is this creature's power. It's only 1. Except it's also hardened scales. If 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a permanent we control, and that many +1/+1/+1 counters are put on that permanent instead. So Kami gives us another way to add more counters than we otherwise would, and hopefully we can put those counters on the Kami as well. We put 1 counter on Kami of Whispered Hopes, it will actually put 2 on it, and now it taps for 3 mana, since it'll have a power of 3. Pretty great. Scales well with this deck. $7 is a lot, but this is also a card that fits into a lot of decks, so if you were to disassemble this deck later on, totally fine, it'll work elsewhere. Or if you were to upgrade this deck, this still scales great with it. Rishkar, of course, lets us tap all of our creatures with counters on them for green mana, and Defiler of Vigor lets us pay life instead of a green pip in any of our green permanent spells, of which we have quite a few. So that is our acceleration section. We have some recursion, but what we're here to look at is our interaction, which again I've tagged as removal. So we're in a red deck. Even though red is sort of a minority color, we still want to run Lightning Bolt. Single red for an instant that does 3 damage to any target is just so good on rate that it's totally worth running in. Like I say, any deck that's playing red might as well use this for just really efficient removal, or can go face as well. It can hit a commander. It can hit a planeswalker. It can hit your opponent and maybe kill them. Yeah, you don't have to run the Strixhaven Mystical Archive printing. There's a lot of beautiful lightning bolts out there, just like Chris Rush's original. But yeah, I try to run the Mystical Archive when I can, and I'm excited to go back to Strixhaven in a month or 2. Next, we've got Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares. I like to talk about these as though they are the same card, because they almost are. They're both a single white, they're both an instant, and they both exile target creature and give a kickback to that creature's controller. Swords to Plowshares gives that creature's controller life equal to its power, and Path to Exile lets that creature's controller rampant growth, finding a basic and putting it on the battlefield tapped. So they're not the same card. There's a significant difference in their power level and in their use case, but in our deck, they're both unconditional creature removal for a single white mana. So strong, totally worth running. Requisition Raid, we've already seen. It lets us destroy artifacts and or enchantments, in addition to putting counters on all of our creatures. When we spree it, Collective Effort also puts a counter on all of our creatures. If we escalate it to do so in addition to these other things, we can do just that. Yeah, we can also use it as interaction by blowing up a big creature or an enchantment. Emergency Eject is a card that I think gets slept on in Commander. If you're not running Generous Gift or Beast Within, because you are at a table that doesn't like land destruction, well then, if you're not running land destruction for a 3-mana removal spell, and you want the flexibility of that card that would run land destruction, you should run Stroke of Midnight instead. Stroke of Midnight, rather than being like Generous Gift, it can't blow up lands, but it gives them a 1/1 rather than a 3/3. To which I say, why give them a creature that can block at all when you can run Emergency Eject? It's 2 and a white for the same thing as Stroke of Midnight, destroy a non-land permanent, and its controller makes a Lander token. A Lander token is a Wayfarer's Bauble. 2, tap, sack the artifact, and they get to Rampant Growth. I think this is just better. It makes it so they don't have a blocker. It makes it so even though they might be able to ramp with it, they have to pay to do so, as opposed to what they would be doing with Path to Exile, which they just get to do it as part of it. I'm not saying Emergency Eject is better than Path to Exile, obviously, but this can hit any non-land permanent. They get a little artifact in play, which may be useful for them, sure, but then they have the ability to Rampant Growth. They've still got to pay to do so, though. Yeah, I think Emergency Eject is really strong for this sort of flexible removal slot you want to run in some decks. Lorna the Third Path is our Reclamation Sage. She disenchants something when she enters. Annie Joins Up is 1 and Naya mana for a legendary enchantment that when it enters, it does 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker that an opponent controls. Pretty sweet. Good removal in general. And it says if a triggered ability of a legendary creature we control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. This includes our commander, and that's really the reason it's in here, but it works on several different creatures. But the idea of being able to put a single counter on something and having Shalai and Hallar's trigger twice, so we get to do 2 damage, maybe to the same opponent, maybe not, just very powerful, doubles up our damage in addition to killing something when Annie Joins Up comes in. Yeah, we want this. Plus, Wiley Beckert art. Amazing. We've seen Ruinous Intrusion. It lets us exile an artifact or enchantment and put counters based on that thing's mana value on one of our creatures. And Chandra's Incinerator is in here too. This is just really fun in this deck. This is a 6/6 elemental for 5 and a red, but it costs X less to cast, where X is the total amount of non-combat damage dealt to our opponents this turn. Who's doing non-combat damage? Our commander is. So if we can put 5 counters on our creatures or among our creatures while our commander's in play, we're going to do 5 non-combat damage to our opponents, at least, assuming no doubling or anything. And now Chandra's Incinerator is a 6/6 trample for a single red. That says, whenever a source we control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, this creature deals that much damage to target creature or planeswalker that player controls. Chandra's Incinerator takes Shalai and Hallar's damage and makes it into... and reflects it, or rather doubles it, basically. Sends it at one of the creatures or planeswalkers on the board as well. So we can use this to ping a bunch of creatures down, kill off a bunch of little X1s if we want with it. Or maybe we're putting, 5 counters among all of our creatures with put a counter on each creature effect. Shalai and Hallar is going to do 5 damage to our opponents, and each time, Chandra's Incinerator is going to do that damage to a creature or planeswalker. We can kill a lot of things with this. In addition, we're probably putting counters on the Incinerator too. So a 6/6 trample is its floor. And it's usually coming down for a lot less than 6 mana. Lots of fun in this deck. That is our interactions section. We are running 1 Wrath. It's Blasphemous Act. Blasphemous Act is, I should mention, non-combat damage. So this would get to trigger Chandra's Incinerator if we wanted to. This is 8 and a red for a sorcery that deals 13 damage to each creature and costs 1 less for each creature on the battlefield. So if there are 8 creatures on the battlefield, this is 13 damage to everything for a single red. It's possible that we can get enough counters on our commander at least that they can survive the Blasphemous Act. That is something we'd like to do if possible. But in any case, being able to ramp as much as we do in this deck, and we're running one more land than I normally do in my decks. This is a 38 lands for my template, and I'm running 39 in this deck because it just works well for us. So being able to get to the point where we Blasphemous Act and wipe the board, we're probably going to be able to rebuild, and not with too much difficulty, especially when we have a number of enchantments and other things that are helping us out that won't be destroyed by this. So when we replay our commander, when we play out our other creatures, we're going to be able to do more with it. So that is our support section. We're going to talk about the supplemental sections now, starting with our extra counters section. We've seen two of these already. Kami of Whispered Hopes and High Score are both Hardened Scales effects. They put an extra counter whenever we put a 1/1 counter on one of our creatures or permanents. They put an extra counter on it additionally. So does Conclave Mentor. This is a green and a white for a 2/2 Centaur Cleric with the Hardened Scales text for our creatures. It also says when it dies, we gain life equal to its power. So if we're pumping it up, we gain more life when it dies. That seems pretty good, but it's really here to be a Hardened Scales that we can attack and block with, that we can put counters on. The more creatures we have, the more powerful the effects that put a 1/1 counter on each of our creatures becomes. So yeah, Conclave Mentor helps us out with that. We're also running Branching Evolution, which is not Hardened Scales, it's Doubling Season, or Primal Vigor, whatever you want to think of it. It's an enchantment for 2 and a green, and it says if one or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature we control, twice that many +1/+1 counters are put on that creature instead. So if we put a 1/1 counter on each creature, we're putting 2 1/1 counters on each creature. If we're doing Ruinous Intrusion and putting that, we're destroying that Meteor Golem I mentioned earlier and putting 7 counters on something, Branching Evolution will instead put 14 counters on that something, triggering our commander and letting us do 14 damage to someone's face. Now I know what you're thinking. It makes sense if we have High Score and Kami of Whispered Hopes in play, since both of them just put an extra counter on things, we would just put 2 extra counters on something whenever we put a counter on it. But what about Branching Evolution? What order do we apply these effects in? Well, the answer is whatever it's affecting, the controller of the permanent that's being affected by a replacement effect gets to decide what order they do it in. And since what we're doing is putting counters on our creatures, we get to decide. For example, if Champion of Lamholt sees another creature enter the battlefield, it'll put a 1/1 counter on itself. Assuming we have a Conclave Mentor in play, it would put an extra counter on, so it would put 2 on. Assuming we had Kami of Whispered Hopes as well, we would put a total of 3, 1 + 1 + 1. But if we had a Branching Evolution as well, then we've got 2 effects that are putting an extra counter and 1 effect that's doubling those counters. We can apply that in any order we want. We can have the original counter double from 1 to 2, then add an extra to 3 and then to 4 for a total of 4. We can have the Conclave Mentor add an extra one, and then the Kami add an extra one, going from 1 to 2 to 3, and then Branching Evolution trigger, so it goes to 6, putting 6 counters on the champion. If we wanted to, we could do it the weirdest way, which is it starts with 1, add 1 for Conclave Mentor, to 2, double from Branching Evolution to 4, add 1 from Kami, to 5. Generally, the way we want to do it is if there are multiple extra counters effects in play, and Branching Evolution is one of them, we always apply it last, because that'll always give us the most we can get. So Champion of Lamholt getting 1 counter, if we have all of these, 1 goes to 2, to 3, to 4, to 8. That's pretty strong. And if we're putting more than a single counter on, and we have some of these in play, yeah, you can see it would get really out of hand. That is our extra counter section. Let's talk now about our payoffs. These are cards that reward us for doing what we were going to do anyway. Keen Sense and Snake Umbra, of course, both reward us for doing damage to an opponent with our commander, which is what we're going to be doing a lot of in this deck. We put these both on our commander, it'll let us draw cards whenever we do that damage. Pretty good for those. Basking Broodscale cares about us putting counters on it, as does Dusk Legion Zealot. This will give us Eldrazi spawn tokens, this will give us cards. Mikey and Leo, much like the Zealot, or the Duelist rather, let us draw a card as well, but whenever we put counters on any of our creatures we control. Both of these are just once a turn, but that's still pretty good. And of course, Evolution Witness gives us the ability to regrow our things whenever we put a 1/1 counter on it, and Chandra's Incinerator lets us take the damage that we do to our opponents and then do it as well to creatures or planeswalkers that player controls. Pretty sweet. That's our payoff section. Next is for the synergy. These are cards that care about the things we're doing, not just rewarding us for it. Or care about what we've got. For example, Inspiring Call and Rishkar care about us having creatures with 1/1 counters on them, because Inspiring Call lets us draw cards for each of those and make them indestructible, and Rishkar lets us tap them for mana. Annie Joins Up doubles the triggers of our legendary creatures, particularly our commander, although it will trigger for Rishkar as well. Rishkar has an enters trigger, so if Annie Joins Up and is in play, Rishkar will trigger twice, and we'll get to put a total of 4 1/1 counters on our creatures. Ascendant Acolyte counts the number of counters we have in play, which is pretty good, and gets all those counters onto itself. And Challenger's Incinerator costs less based on the amount of non-combat damage dealt to our opponents this turn, which is what our commander is going to be doing as many turns as we can make them. That is our synergy section. We have several ways to make tokens. We've seen all of these, of course. Basking Brood Scale, whenever we put counters on it, will give us an Eldrazi spawn. Diadrine, whenever we attack and we take a counter off of 2 different creatures, we make a 2/2 robot in addition to drawing a card. Warden of the Grove is not usually going to be making us spirit tokens when we have our creatures endure, because we want to put counters on them, but we sure could do that if we wanted to. Felidar Retreat, similarly, we'd rather put counters on our creatures, but we can make these cat beasts in the process. And Virtue of Loyalty can let us use Ardenvale Fealty's Adventure, or the adventure called Ardenvale Fealty, to make a 2/2 Knight with Vigilance. And that is our token section. We have a section for protection. Of course, we want to protect ourselves and our stuff. We've seen all of these except for the Swifties. Swiftfoot Boots is 2 generic mana for an equipment that equips for 1 and gives the equipped creature hexproof and haste. We're doing this for the hexproof. We want to put this on Shalai and Hallar because they're doing so much direct damage to our opponents. Of course, our opponents are going to try and remove them. Harder to do if they are hexproof. Haste can't hurt either. Inspiring Call, of course, makes all of our creatures with +1/+1 counters on them indestructible. Snake Umbra has Umbra Armor, so that it will protect our commander if someone tries to remove it. Unbreakable Formation gives all of our creatures indestructible. Shalai gives us, our planeswalkers, and all of our other creatures hexproof, and Slippery Bog Bonder can also give something hexproof by putting a hexproof counter on it. So that's our protection section. We have an evasion section. We've talked about it before. It's Champion of Lambhold. Makes it so as long as the Champion of Lambhold's power is big enough, our creatures can't be blocked. At least by creatures that have sufficient power. Eventually, we can't be blocked at all because the champion's going to get too big. And last, we have this recursion section, which we've also seen before. It's Evolution Witness. Lets us regrow our things, any permanent cards in our graveyard. Most of our cards are permanents. Every time we put a counter on the Evo Witness. And that is the spells in our deck. As usual, we're going to go over our land base now, starting with our basics. We have this spread. If you wanted to make your basic count a little bit closer to the proportions in this deck, we would actually cut some plains and maybe even a mountain, maybe even both mountains to add more forests, but this ends up working out totally fine for us, and it gives us the ability to not be as worried about whether or not we're going to get enough white to cast our white spells, since even though we're mostly green, we've got quite a bit of white and a good amount of red in our deck. But we're mostly surviving our red based on our dual lands, which we'll see more of in a moment. And obviously, we're running Dominaria United Johannes Voss lands because these are both creatures from Dominaria. We're running all 3 bicycle lands. Glittering Massif is the bicycle land for Boros colors. I'll use it as our example. Bicycle lands are dual-typed lands. They have 2 types, basic types, and they enter tapped. But since they have those basic types, inherently, they can tap for the colors of those basic types. So red for mountains, white for plains. They also have the ability to cycle for 2 generic mana, meaning we can pay 2 and discard it from our hand to draw a card. Pretty sweet if we draw this late game and we just don't need any more mana, pay the 2, turn this into some other card, just draw something else. But this is usually my target when I'm going to Farseek or something along those lines, because I want to be able to find a land that I'm going to be able to use for more than just 1 color of mana. Now, if I want to Farseek for just a simple basic land, then that's just Rampant Growth, and that's fine. I have other Rampant Growth effects in the deck, though. So Farseek for Scattered Groves to find a plains, also gives me access to the green mana I need. Using Farseek to find Sheltered Thicket for a mountain also, again, gives me green mana. Usually don't find Glittering Massif with it, but you sure could if you needed to. Maybe you've got enough green and you need more white and red, and so Glittering Massif is an option for you. If you wanted to upgrade the bicycle lands, even though their cycling ability is really nice, you could upgrade to slow lands for a little... No, not slow lands, I'm sorry, to surveil lands in this deck. Surveil lands are also dual typed, and they also come in tapped, but they give you a surveil when they do. They're just much more expensive. It's the check lands that you could upgrade to slow lands. Rootbound Crag is going to be our example. This is a land without basic types, so we can't fetch for this in this deck. It adds red or green, and it comes in tapped unless we control a mountain or a forest. What's nice is we're running 16 basics, all 3 bicycle lands in our colors, and we're also running all 3 Tangle lands in our colors. So that's 22 cards in our deck that have basic types to make our check lands come in untapped. They're very likely to come in untapped. If you wanted to run slow lands, they might have a little more consistency for you, but they are much more expensive than, 50 cents, 30 cents, and so forth. I think the check lands are also really lovely. We've got these 5 fixing lands. So, of course, we're running Command Tower. This is Arcane Signet on a land, if you want to think of it that way. It's an untapped land that taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. Again, white, red, or green. Excellent for us. An untapped tri-land. We would run this if it were tapped, like a Path of Ancestry. This is a tap land with the same text as Command Tower, except it also says whenever we use its mana to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with our commander, we scry one. So obviously, our commander shares creature types with itself. It is an angel and an elf, so when we use this mana to cast our commander, we get to scry one. We have 1 other angel in the deck, which is original Shalai, and we have 4 other elves. So this is a tapped tri-land in this deck that sometimes gives us a scry. That's pretty good. We are also running Exotic Orchard. Exotic Orchard, if Command Tower is Arcane Signet, Exotic Orchard is Wayfarer's, is not Wayfarer's Bauble, good grief, it's Felwar Stone. It's an untapped land that taps for 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. So everything I said about the Felwar Stone is still relevant here. Interestingly, if our opponent also has an Exotic Orchard, then our Exotic Orchard can tap for any mana that it could tap for, and it can tap for any mana that our lands can tap for, meaning Exotic Orchard taps for any color of mana that our lands can tap for. That's pretty good. We're running Crozen Verge as our sort of Myriad Landscape fetch land type thing for the deck. It's also sort of a backup Farseek for us in a way. So this is a tap land that taps for colorless. We can also pay 2 and tap and sack it to search our library for a forest and a plains, put them on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. It does not say basic forest or basic plains, so much like Farseek, we can go find ourselves a Cinderglade and a Glittering Massif, whatever we want with those. They'll come in tapped, and then we'll shuffle. So this is slow. It's a land that comes in tapped. We have to pay mana and tap it to activate it, and then the lands it brings in are tapped, but it is 1 land drop that's giving us 2 lands eventually. That's still pretty good, and it is ramp in our land base. You could, instead, run Blighted Woodland if you'd like. Blighted Woodland is similar to this, but it costs 3 and a green, tap and sack, and then you don't get to find typed lands, you have to find 2 basics. However, it does not come in tapped. So, it's a trade-off. I think Crozen Verge is better for this deck since you can find your duels, and you can activate it to do so earlier on, but maybe you don't want this tap land, so yeah, you've got options. Last of all in this section is Temple of the False God. Not everyone likes this, but it's perfect for the power level of decks that I build, and it's just very strong, but it has a limitation. So Temple of the False God is an untapped land that taps for 2 colorless mana, just like Sol Ring. This is a soul land. But we can't activate it at all unless we control at least 4 other lands, so 5 or more lands including itself. So if your opening hand is a basic mountain and Temple of the False God, you probably want to mulligan. But if you get this out on turn 5, and you've got 4 other lands in play, then you've just accelerated yourself. If you get this out earlier than that, and maybe you've already accelerated with a Rampant Growth or a Farseek or something, you're doing great. Temple of the False God can be very powerful for you. Yeah. We're running all 3 Pain lands in our colors. We'll use Brushland as our example. This is an untapped land with no basic types that taps for colorless, or you can tap it for green or white if you're willing to let it do a damage to you in the process. This is a great deal. An untapped, possibly dual land for us. Most of the time, if we don't need the colored mana, we just tap it for colorless, no big deal. And if we do need the colored mana, that means we're a single point of damage away from casting a spell. We just need one more colored mana to cast a spell, which is the same thing as being one mana away from a spell. Brushland sort of says, are you one mana short? Well, you can pay a life instead. That's totally worth it. So yeah, these pain lands are very strong. You could certainly upgrade them if you want. I would side grade them, is what I'd call it, into pathways. Pathways are a couple of dollars more, but very strong. They're modal double-faced lands. You'd be getting a green side or a white side. You choose whichever one you want at the time. Brushlands or rather the pain lands are not quite the same as the pathways, but these are definitely cheaper. And so yeah, that's how I think of it. I mentioned the Tango lands. These are also typed duals. We'll look at the Radiant Summit because it's the newest in the cycle. This is a Mountain Plains, so it's dual typed, and it doesn't necessarily enter untapped. It enters tapped unless we control 2 or more basic lands. And as we saw, we have 16 basics in the library. That's about a sixth of our library. So there's a good possibility, especially if we're fetching for them, that we might get to have this come in untapped. Pretty sweet. If you want to upgrade to Nature's Lore can find Canopy Vista, since it's a forest, and put it into play untapped. And if this were to come in untapped because we have 2 basic lands in play, we've just found an untapped dual. That's pretty great. So yeah, we've got all 3 of the Tango lands in this. Jungle Shrine is our tri-land. This is a tapped land that taps for all 3 of our colors. So it's a little worse than Path of Ancestry, which is a little worse than Command Tower, and it's still worth running in our deck because it gives us all of our colors. If you wanted to upgrade this, Jetmir's Garden is the Triome that would fit this. The Triome has all 3 land types and can cycle for 3, much more expensive than Jungle Shrine, rather. And I should mention that for the Tango lands, if you wanted to upgrade them, the Shock lands would be a good option, but of course more expensive. Last of all, we have these 5 utility lands. So even in the decks that I build for this channel, which are built for sort of core level commander play, at those pods, people tend to look down on land destruction, as I mentioned earlier when we were talking about emergency eject. And that's fair. Not everyone wants to be in a game where they're getting resource denied. But sometimes a non-basic land is proving to be a threat or an answer that itself needs to be answered. If someone's running a Rogue's Passage and making their Voltron commander unblockable, or if someone's running a Glacial Chasm and stopping us from doing any damage to them, well then we need to be able to answer that. And Demolition Field is a great way to do so without serious feel-bads. Or really any feel-bads. So this is an untapped land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 2, tap, and sack it to destroy a non-basic land that an opponent controls. And then that opponent gets to search their library for a basic land and put it on the battlefield untapped. And so do we. So neither we nor they are down a land, and we've been able to remove the thing that was standing in the way of our victory or getting our opponent too far ahead with their own. This is a reasonable thing. They even have that mana available to them right then, assuming of course they had an extra basic left in their library, which is a deck building choice. And so yeah, Demolition Field, hard to say that this is a sort of violation of the social contract, even at a table that's expecting there not to be any land destruction. Because it's not resource denial, just an answer to a threat. Gavany Township is next. This is an untapped land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 2, a green and a white, and tap it to put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control. So that's a lot of mana. That's 5 mana, if you think of it as the 4 here and tapping the township itself. But if we get to a point where maybe there's been a board wipe, maybe there is a stall going on, maybe we're just not drawing what we need, this gives us a mana sink that lets us put counters on all of our creatures and hopefully trigger our commander, or at least pump up our board in a way that we can keep getting more value out of. I chose to use Gavany Township, even though in the Avatar of the Last Airbender set, recently Abandoned Air Temple was printed. Abandoned Air Temple is a land that comes in tapped unless you control a basic. It taps for white, and then it only requires 4 mana, but it doesn't require any green mana. It's just white and colorless mana for the same effect. I chose Gavany Township over it because there's a chance Abandoned Air Temple could come in tapped. And minimizing the number of tap lands when we already have a few of them seemed more important to me, especially because the need for white is true in both lands for their activated ability. The need for green is our most populous color, so we're not going to be worried about that. So yeah. I'm going to skip to Oran Reef the Vastwood, pardon me. This is a land that enters tapped and taps for green, and we can also tap it to just put a 1/1 counter on each green creature that entered this turn. Most of our creatures are green. We have about 30 creatures in the deck, I believe, that are green. And any creature that's multicolored with green pips in its cost is also a green creature. The only creature that is not green, that has green pips in its cost, is our Basking Broodscale, because it has Devoid. So if we were to activate Oran Reef when the Broodscale has entered that same turn, it will not get a counter because it is not green. However, this is still putting an extra counter on many of our creatures. Similar to our Plant Druid, our creature from OTJ, the Raucous Entertainer, paying a single mana and tapping it to put a 1/1 counter on each creature that entered the battlefield this turn is similar to Oran Reef, because we're paying a mana and tapping this, think of it as it producing the mana, to put a counter on each green creature that entered this turn. That's pretty similar, and it plays the same way. It means that if we spend just 1 extra mana in the form of the Vastwood itself, we're getting to put counters on our creatures, at least the green ones, extra every turn for the additional cost of a single mana. Seems good. Last, we have Mosswort Bridge and Spinerock Knoll, which are both hideaway lands. They both come in tapped, and they both have Hideaway 4, which means when they enter, we look at the top 4 cards of our library, we get to pick one and exile it face down underneath the land, and then we put the rest of the cards we saw on the bottom of our library in a random order. Mosswort Bridge taps for green, Spinerock Knoll taps for red, and then that card that we exiled when we hid it away, we have a chance to play it without paying its mana cost if we meet a condition. Mosswort Bridge says we can pay a green and tap to play the exiled card without paying its mana cost anytime we have creatures of total power 10 or greater. So it costs us essentially 2 mana to cast it, the green and tapping the bridge itself. But if we have a bunch of creatures that give us a total of 10 or more power on the battlefield, which is not hard in a counters deck, we can get a free, otherwise quote-unquote free spell using Mosswort Bridge. Spinerock Knoll, a little harder for us to do in this deck, but it does give us red mana, and it lets us use our red mana to play that exiled card without paying its mana cost if an opponent was dealt 7 or more damage this turn. What's nice about that is it can come from combat damage, it can come from the direct damage that our commander is doing, it can come from a combination of those two, heck, it could come from the lightning bolt that we've got in our deck. But it does not say if an opponent was dealt 7 or more damage by you or sources you control this turn. So we can activate this on another opponent's turn. Maybe opponent A has just attacked opponent B and done 7 or more damage to them. During that turn, we can pay a red and tap the Spinerock Knoll to play the hidden away card with it. That seems like a lot of fun to sneak something out that way. And that sums it up. Again, I've made a deck for every March of the Machine legend, save one. So normally I would say let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a specific commander, but there's only one left, and I guess we're going to see it next week. This has been a long project, and I'm excited to conclude it, not because I'm done with it, but because it's just been fun. So let me know if there are cards you'd like to see me build commander decks for next after this project is over. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you want to support what I do here, make sure to like and subscribe, ring the bell if you want to be notified when my videos go live, consider becoming a member of the channel. That's something new I'm doing, so I'd like to see some members if you have an interest in it. But most of all, remember that magic is fun. You should play more Magic.